Hello and welcome to CNBC TV18 Newsmaker. I'm Parikshit. Luthra. Interglobe Aviation has registered a 111% jump in net profit in Q3 on the back of continued demand for air travel and a fuel surcharge introduced in October. Net profit came in at rupees 2,998 crore against 1,422 crore during the same period last year. Revenue is up 30% at rupees 19,452 crore. Total income came in at 20,062 crore, up from 15,410 crore last year. Let's discuss the Q3 results for the airline with the company's CEO, Pieter Elbers. Pieter, thank you very much for joining us. Before we get on to speaking about the stellar quarter gone by and the growth that IndiGo is looking ahead, how would you rate the Indian interim budget, the fiscal discipline and fiscal consolidation path that has been taken by the Indian government? How do you see the budget push, the policy push of the Indian government, first of all?
Well, thank you. I must admit, I didn't expect that question. And being a year and a half in the country now, I think I can pretty well comment on the results of IndiGo. I'm in probably a more difficult position to comment on the overall budget. But if I were to take out one or two highlights, I think the continued investments in infrastructure, the continued investments in the aviation industry in general, the whole philosophy of Made in India, whereby actually we're collectively building an ecosystem of airlines, airports, manufacturers, service suppliers, and so on and so forth. I think many of these things were seen in a very great reflection in that budget as well.
Right. Now, coming to the Q3 results for the airline. This is the fifth straight quarter of profits for IndiGo. How do you see the FY24, this entire fiscal for the airline?
You know, I think it's very important, and thanks for reflecting that. We started to recover from COVID 5 quarters ago, and we started to implement our new strategy, really. And the effects of that have been very solid and very robust. And with that, indeed, this is the fifth consecutive quarter of profits, a doubling of that result compared to last year, a little short of 3,000 crore profit in this quarter, 1,400 something crore 1 year ago. So that doubled. And with that doubling effect, and that's an important aspect, it brings us back to a network positive company. And we're, in fact, that's an important signal that we're recovering from all the losses incurred during COVID. We have been able to have another 27% growth in this quarter and a new record in terms of customer numbers, welcoming 27.5 million customers in a single quarter on board of our flights.
Right. So how do you see the growth overall in FY24? What's your prediction like?
You know, let me take a step back. We put the ambition out somewhere in 22 to achieve the milestone of 100 million customers in a year. And actually, we're very proud that at the end of calendar year 23, we have achieved that number of 100 million customers in 1 year. And there's just a single digit number of airlines in the world. And that number, we're very proud as IndiGo to be an Indian carrier for the first time in history, achieving those numbers. We actually gave a capacity guidance for the entire fiscal year in the north of the mid-teens. If we look what we have done now in the various quarters, with 27 in the last quarter, and today we projected some 12% for Q4. That total will bring us up to slightly over 20% for the entire year, which is I would say, a formidable growth number, especially on the high base which we are having already.
Right. I would also like to ask you about your plans for the next fiscal. What, according to you, will be the major growth drivers for the airline?
Yeah, well, the growth of India as a country and the GDP outlook, the development of the country, and not only in the metros, but even more so sometimes in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And we have been able to develop over the past years, and the company is only 17 years young, but we have accelerated a lot of the growth actually in the last year, the last 18 months. Today operating over 500 routes, and that also is going to be very much the foundation for the year ahead. So we are targeting to continue to build our network. Today, 86 domestic destinations and 32 international. We continue to build that number for the year ahead, and we'll also continue to build that number of routes. It's a very important part, and you see that, you know, whereas if I take our flights, for example, to Singapore, we used to have an operation to Singapore from 1 or 2 Indian cities. Today, I think it's 6. We introduced new international flights out of Ahmedabad into the Middle East. We introduced a whole range of new domestic flights. And with that development, we continue to build on that also well into next year.
Right. If I were to ask you a little more specifically, how many domestic routes would you like to add? What would be your ambition in terms of adding new international routes in the coming 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to make our competition much wiser than they already are. But I would take a strong encouragement from the growth we did. And in the past 18 months, we have added roughly 18 destinations. You know, I had the pleasure of joining IndiGo in September of 22. At that point in time, we were inaugurating our 100th destination. Today, we do 118. So that's in a time frame of roughly 18 months, a similar number of destinations. And I would not see too much reason to weaken that pace of growth going forward. So I would aspire in the next 18 to 24 months, a similar number in terms of development.
Right. Now, in terms of travel demand, that has been very robust, and that's really adding to your growth as well. How do you see the travel demand going forward? In the union budget, we saw a lot of focus on tourism as well. So in terms of consumer demand, how does the picture look like for the next few months?
Yeah, you know, let me start by just a general observation that India, in terms of air travel, is a largely underserved or underpenetrated market. And just measuring the GDP to the number of planes, measuring the population to the number of planes, measuring the megacities to the number of planes, we actually do see a lot of growth potential. And with that, and you could see that at some of the recent predictions also by the Indian government, domestic air travel is expected to double towards the end of the decade. So between 250-ish million today on domestic, it's expected to move up to 300 million towards the end of the decade. International growth, in fact, is expected to grow even faster. Firstly, because there's going to be a lot of new routes. And secondly, I think the share of Indian carriers, and us being one of them, is relatively limited compared to some of the foreign carriers. So that combination makes us very confident on that future growth potential. And I think the fleet orders we have at hand, and we almost have 1,000 planes on order, are really helping us to prepare for that growth going forward. So we're confident for the year ahead, but the big picture is actually even more exciting, with doubling in size towards the end of the decade.
I would also like to ask you about your aircraft delivery orders. You're sitting on an order book of about 1,000 aircraft. What is the delivery timeline that you're looking at, and the kind of fleet strength you'll have by the end of FY25?
Yeah, that order book, I would say, is really a strategic asset of IndiGo, and we were already well placed in terms of order book. And in addition to the 400 something which we still had on order, this summer we placed the record number order of 500 new aircraft to be delivered well into the next decade. And that means that we have a projection for planes to be delivered well into the next decade. And that's important. And why is it important? Because that will allow us also with airports, and I think our recent agreement with the new airport in Delhi, Jebra Airport, to be constructed in Noida, is a very important aspect. So we have a clear sight of the growth. And for the years ahead, we expect to have deliveries of one plane every week. And if you just think about that for the many years to come, each and every week, IndiGo will receive a new plane. I think that says a lot about the potential, about the growth, and really going hand in hand with the growth of India itself.
Right. In terms of issues weighing down the aviation industry, including high ATF prices, what would be some of the factors which are affecting your margins?
You know, as an airline, of course, fuel is always an important element of it, and we know that the fuel is driven by a lot of geopolitical and developments on the world stage. So that's as a nature is for aviation and for airlines an important factor, and IndiGo is no exception to that. I think, however, the market is maturing, and we had introduced a fuel surcharge when the prices went up. We removed it when the fuel prices went down, and I think that more dynamic mechanism is very telling about the direction where the Indian market is moving, and with that becoming also more mature as one of the leading aviation markets in the world. And so I would expect that to continue going forward.
Any possibility of a rise in ticket prices?
You know, prices of tickets are always a function of various factors. Demand comes into play, supply comes into play. There's a certain willingness for customers to pay for fare for travel to a certain extent. There's of course inflation here in India itself, which is affecting and reflected in prices of consumer goods and of airfares as well. So that's always a combination. I think we have demonstrated over the past couple of quarters that some of the costs which go up and down are also being reflected in airfares and air prices. And at the end of the day, the consumer, of course, is the driving factor in it.
Right. When it comes to placing orders for wide-body aircraft, what is the status of internal discussions on that front?
You know, our reply, and today will be no exception to that, is that we keep all options open, and further no commenting on any suggestions or questions on what is the exact fleet configuration or even different types of aircraft. What is important though, and I'd like to underline that, is that we do have the Airbus 321 XLR on order. That will significantly extend our network. Today it brings us to parts of Asia. It will bring us basically to the fringes of Europe. The XLR will bring us further into Europe, further into Asia, and stations like Athens in Greece, or even Geneva or Seoul. So there's quite a few possible network expansions going to be possible with the XLR, which we have on order and which will be coming in due course of 25.
Let me also ask you about the issues that we have seen this winter with massive flight delays across the airline sector. And these are also issues we see in the airline industry globally. But now, speaking about some of the issues with the Indian airline sector that we have seen in this winter, the shortage of Cat 3 trained pilots, how are you looking to overcome this issue? Upskilling of pilots, how much would you be investing in this front to avoid this crisis or mitigate this crisis next winter?
Yeah, you know, maybe just to reflect on the supposedly shortage of Cat 3 pilots. I would say at IndiGo, in general, we were having enough pilots and enough Cat 3 pilots. I think where we have seen this winter a combination of a couple of factors. In the first place, the fog was longer, denser, and much wider than we have seen before. And if you just look at some of the weather statistics and compare it to previous years, it just has been a much more intense and much more impactful than it was in previous years. And again, just look at some of the meteo statistics. And clearly, with a growing industry, with a growing sector, that has had its effects. And then we come to airports, and especially in the northern belt of India, where the fog was intense and was very persistent. And I think with that, collectively as an industry, we should take some learnings from it in terms of coordination, in terms of making sure that we have the right equipment everywhere, in terms of making sure that we have the right communication everywhere. So, and I think for us at IndiGo, we took on quite a couple of flights. We took a deliberate call not to cancel and to operate. Flights were full, and we just wanted to make sure that customers were reaching their destination, and that resulted in that combination of actually quite a few delays, and then when the system is disrupted. You know, if I take some of the other events we had, like the cyclone in Chennai, we basically recovered after that one in like 36 hours. and it had a massive impact. So I think in general, as a system, we are ready and good to deal with it. There's always learnings to be drawn from it, which we'll surely do also together with the airports.
Right. 1.2 crore fine. That was the fine that was imposed on IndiGo. There were fines imposed on other airlines as well. What are you doing to address these violations and make sure these don't happen in future?
You know, of course, we take learnings from whatever happened on the 14th. And I think I've mentioned before on the 14th of January, that was the day it was linked to. There's no single point of failure in these type of situations. And I think all our staff was really doing their level best to make sure that customers were getting on their destination. It was a situation which was unprecedented in terms of fog and impact on delays. And we're reviewing, of course, the fine which was imposed. We're engaged in discussions and evaluations, and we take it from there.
Right. So has IndiGo paid up that fine?
Again, we're evaluating, and there's a possibility to engage in the discussion, and we take it from there. I would not like to further speculate at this point in time on that specific topic.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the grounding of aircraft and how are you dealing with that. But before that, the visuals that we have seen of passengers having to eat food on the tarmac, how would you address that? Because that had raised a lot of concerns from passengers on social media and otherwise. How would you address that?
Well, let me be clear. It is not IndiGo who's asking customers to eat on the tarmac. There was an accumulation of events that day, and again, I rather don't go into the specific details. Accumulation of events which resulted in this, and there's various stakeholders and various elements are involved in this situation. It's not IndiGo asking customers to have food on the tarmac. You've seen the image, we've seen the image. We're deeply evaluating what precisely has happened and how we, again, collectively as an aviation ecosystem can avoid this in the future.
Right. 40 more aircraft are in the process of getting grounded. How is this going to impact your fleet going forward? What mitigation measures are you taking?
You know, there's this global supply chain challenge is there for some time already. There's, in addition to that, there has been some communication from the OEM on additional inspections on engines to be done. Of course, that influences IndiGo. But what is important, I would say, is that at IndiGo, we've taken a whole range of mitigating measures. And these mitigating measures have enabled us to live up to our capacity guidance. And I think we started this conversation by reflecting on the third quarter and the results of the third quarter. The third quarter, we had a significant number of groundings due to supply chain challenges. Yet we have been able to grow 27%, and yet we have been able to achieve the results which we have achieved. So the mitigating measures which we have taken in terms of lease extensions, damp leases, keeping some planes in operation, reintroduction of some planes, have really helped us to do that. And going forward, the order book of IndiGo, which we spoke about earlier, with all these planes on orders and a plane coming in each and every week, are really helping us to mitigate this situation. So, of course, I would wish the situation was not there. Of course, I would wish that we would not have been confronted with this situation with the OEMs, for which we, of course, are in intense and long discussions with them. But I think at IndiGo, we have taken a whole range of mitigating measures, helping us to address it in the best possible way.
My final two questions to you, Pieter. The challenges for the aviation industry globally. We're looking at a very difficult geopolitical environment. If there's one thing that worries you, looking at the geopolitics right now, what would that be?
You know, I think the geopolitical situation and the various complexities in the world have different dimensions. I would when you ask what is the effect on IndiGo, I would say there's a couple of them. One, of course, is the supply chain challenges, and the other one is the fluctuations in fuel prices. And I think those are the elements for IndiGo.
Right. And finally, as we conclude this interview, and as you engage with the Indian government on various issues, do you feel there are certain things or maybe the top 2 or 3 things, according to you, which the Indian government can do to make sure that the aviation industry in the country grows faster?
You know, I think the Indian government has accelerated a lot of initiatives over the past couple of years, and all these initiatives are now starting to bear fruit. The fact that the new airport will open in Delhi, a new airport will open in Mumbai, a whole range of new regional airports have been opened, policies are being changed. So I would actually like to underline all these initiatives and all these efforts which have been taken. And I would say without many of these initiatives, this doubling towards the end of the decade would just not be possible. So we continue to build, and therefore I mentioned it a couple of times already. I think the ecosystem where all the parties have a specific role to play, and the facilitation and the support given by the government when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to policies, when it comes to making sure that the aviation industry continues to drive. And we started this interview with your question on the budget and the things which are related to that. I think that is all coming together and making sure that the ambition to build a global aviation hub in India and the geographical position and the size and the GDP of the country is really supporting that. That will all come together in the years to come.
All right. Thank you very much, Pieter Elbers, for joining us, giving us your view on the Indian aviation industry, what's going to drive the growth of IndiGo, and how you're going to get at least 1 aircraft per week. And that shows your confidence in the Indian aviation industry and India's potential as an economy. Thank you once again for being with us. With that, we come to the wrap of this special broadcast. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.